kind of slow either.
Beat it.
I haven't finished my sandwich.
This city doesn't forgive, it just forgets. New York, Confidential wasn't just a crime film. It was a snapshot of organized crime before anyone really understood what the mob looked like. But behind the fedoras and double crosses, nothing went as planned. The script was ripped from real headlines, the lead actor despised his co-star, and one scene, it was so violent the censors made them reshoot it 3 times. These are 20 weird facts about New York Confidential. And the bonus, let's just say the film's technical advisor had connections the studio never asked about. Light a cigarette. This gets dark fast. Number 1. New York Confidential started as something nobody wanted to talk about. In 1952, Senator Estes Kefauver held televised hearings that exposed organized crime's grip on American cities. Millions watched mobsters plead the fifth on live TV, Frank Costello's hand shaking under the lights. The American public got their first real look at the syndicate, and they were horrified and fascinated in equal measure. Producer Edward Small saw an opportunity. He wanted to make a film that felt like those hearings, cold, documentary style, unstylized, something that showed the mob as a business, not a gang of colorful thugs. He hired screenwriter Clarence Green, who had a reputation for gritty realism, and told him one thing: make it feel like the news. Green didn't fictionalize much. He pulled directly from Kefauver testimony transcripts, real organizational structures, actual methods the mob used to control unions and legitimate businesses. The result was a script that read less like a thriller and more like an expose. Warner Brothers passed on it. Too real, they said, too dangerous. But Small pushed forward with independent financing, and what landed on screen wasn't just entertainment, it was a warning wrapped in noir shadows. The mob wasn't romantic anymore. It was corporate, and that made it terrifying. Number 2. Broderick Crawford was perfect for the role of Charlie Lupo, the syndicate boss with ice in his veins and a temper that could shatter glass. But Crawford didn't want it. He just won an Oscar for All the King's Men and was being courted for prestige projects, period dramas, serious character work. A low-budget crime film felt like a step backward. Producer Edward Small didn't take no for an answer. He flew to Crawford's house unannounced, script in hand, and made his pitch on the front lawn. He told Crawford this wasn't just another gangster picture. This was the chance to play power, real power, the kind that doesn't need a gun to destroy lives. Crawford read the first 10 pages standing in his driveway. By page 20, he was sitting on his front steps. By the time he finished, he called his agent and said yes, but he had one condition: no glorification. If they made Charlie Lupo sympathetic, if they turned him into some tragic anti-hero, Crawford was out. Small agreed. And what Crawford delivered was chilling. A man who ran murder like a board meeting, who ordered hits between bites of steak, who saw people as expenses. It wasn't flashy, it was suffocating, and it remains one of the most unsettling mob performances ever captured on film. Number 3. The film needed a killer. Not a thug, not muscle, but a professional. Someone cold, methodical, and completely detached. Enter Richard Conte as Nick Magellan, a hired gun who treats murder like accounting. Conte was known for playing conflicted characters, men with souls wrestling with their sins. But director Russell Rouse wanted none of that. He told Conte, no emotion, no backstory, you're a tool. Conte hated the direction at first. He argued for depth, for motivation, for some glimpse of humanity. Rouse refused. He wanted a void, and reluctantly Conte delivered. He played Nick with empty eyes and flat delivery, a man so disconnected from what he did that violence was just procedure. The performance unnerved audiences. There was nothing to latch onto, no redemption arc waiting in the wings. Just a man who killed efficiently and went home. Critics didn't know what to make of it. Some called it wooden, others called it revolutionary. But what Conte created was something rare in 1950s cinema. A character completely devoid of moral conflict. He wasn't tortured, he wasn't even interested, and that absence of feeling, that vacuum where a conscience should be, made him far more frightening than any snarling villain ever could. Number 4. Anne Bancroft was just starting out when she was cast as Kathy Lupo, the mob boss's daughter caught between loyalty and disgust. She was 23 years old, barely known, and completely overwhelmed. This was only her fourth film, and she was acting opposite Broderick Crawford, an Oscar winner with a reputation for intensity and impatience. From day one, Crawford made it clear he didn't have time for inexperience. He wouldn't rehearse with her. He barely acknowledged her between takes. Bancroft later admitted she cried in her trailer more than once, convinced she was going to be fired. But something strange happened. The tension between them bled into their scenes. The coldness Crawford showed her off-camera became the suffocating dynamic between a controlling father and a daughter desperate to escape. Director Russell Rouse noticed it immediately and leaned in. He encouraged Bancroft to channel her fear, her frustration, her anger. And she did. What started as a painful, isolating experience turned into one of the most raw performances of her early career. Years later, after Bancroft became a legend, she reflected on New York Confidential in an interview. Yes, she said Crawford never apologized, never softened, but also never laid. He treated her like the business treated everyone, coldly, efficiently, and without sentiment. And in a film about the mob, that was the most authentic direction she could have received.
Not a beauty, Iris? Real class, huh?
Mr. Magellan makes a very handsome picture.
Number 5. The script was based on a book by Jack Late and Lee Mortimer, two crime reporters who made a career out of exposing corruption. Their book, also called New York Confidential, was part of a series that ripped the cover off organized crime in major American cities. It was sensational, lurid, and packed with names, dates, and accusations that made lawyers nervous. The book didn't just hint at mob activity. It named businesses, politicians, and enforcers. Some of it was investigative journalism. Some of it was barely legal gossip. When Edward Small optioned the rights, he knew he couldn't film the book as written. Lawsuits would bury the production before cameras even rolled. So screenwriter Clarence Green took the structure, the tone, and the organizational details, then fictionalized every character. Charlie Lupo wasn't Frank Costello. Nick Magellan wasn't a real hitman. But the methods, the business operations, the way the syndicate laundered money through legitimate fronts, that was all real. Green even consulted with former law enforcement to verify accuracy. The result was a film that felt like a documentary wrapped in a thriller. Audiences recognized the truth underneath the fiction, and that made it dangerous. Because New York Confidential didn't just entertain. It educated. It showed how the mob worked, how it spread, how it infected every level of society. And for a film released in 1955, that was a bold, risky move. Number 6. The film's technical advisor was a man named Burton Turkis, a former assistant district attorney who had prosecuted Murder Inca, one of the most infamous mob enforcement arms in American history. Turkis had put killers on death row. He knew how the syndicate operated from the inside. And when Edward Small hired him to ensure the film's accuracy, Turkis didn't hold back. He walked the writers through organizational charts. He explained how bosses insulated themselves from street-level crime. He described the language, the codes, the way orders were passed down without ever being explicitly stated. The crew started calling him the Professor because his lectures on mob structure were more detailed than most college courses. But there was something else. Turkis had connections. He knew people who knew people. And during production, strange things happened. A location that had refused to let them film suddenly opened up. A union dispute that threatened to shut down the shoot quietly resolved overnight. Props appeared that shouldn't have been available, authentic mob paraphernalia that looked a little too real. Nobody asked where Turkis got them. Nobody wanted to know. Years later, crew members would joke that the film's authenticity came from sources the studio never put in the credits. And maybe they were right, because New York Confidential didn't just look real, it felt real. And sometimes, in Hollywood, that kind of authenticity comes with connections you don't advertise. Number 7. The movie was shot almost entirely on location in New York City, which was rare for 1955. Most studios preferred the control of sound stages, where lighting, sound, and weather could be managed. But director Russell Rouse insisted on real streets, real buildings, real shadows. He wanted the city to be a character, not a backdrop. So the crew packed up cameras and headed to Manhattan. They filmed in actual nightclubs, some of which had rumored mob ties. They shot in tenement hallways that still smelled like decades of cooking and cigarette smoke. They staged scenes in back alleys where garbage cans doubled as set dressing. The authenticity was undeniable, but it came with problems. Crowds gathered during shoots, gawking, shouting, ruining takes. Street noise bled into every scene. Permits were a nightmare. At one point, a local precinct captain showed up and suggested, politely but firmly, that they wrap up and move along. Rouse complied without argument. He knew better than to push. But the location work paid off. New York Confidential doesn't look like a Hollywood movie. It looks like a document. The grit, the texture, the shadows falling across actual brick and concrete. None of it could be replicated on a studio lot. And that raw, unglamorous realism became the film's signature. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't polished. It was New York in the 1950s, a city where crime and commerce blurred into one suffocating machine. Number 8. Marilyn Maxwell played Iris Palmer, the nightclub singer caught in Charlie Lupo's orbit. On paper, she was the femme fatale, the glamorous distraction. But Maxwell didn't play it that way. She'd spent years in Hollywood being typecast as the bombshell, the pretty face with little to do. By the time she landed in New York Confidential, she was tired of it. So when Rouse gave her the role, she rewrote it in her head. Iris wasn't a seductress. She was a survivor, a woman who understood exactly how dangerous these men were and played the game because it was the only game in town. Maxwell brought weariness to the role, a kind of exhausted pragmatism that made Iris feel real. She wasn't dazzled by power, she was numbed by it. During one scene, she was supposed to sing a sultry number in the club. Instead, she sang it hollow, almost mechanical, like a woman going through motions she'd repeated 1,000 times. Rouse loved it. He kept the take. Maxwell later said that role was the closest she ever got to playing the truth about Hollywood. The nightclubs, the powerful men, the women who smiled while calculating their survival, it wasn't just the mob, it was the industry. And in New York Confidential, she finally got to show what that looked like without the gloss.
The father's been shot.
Papa shot.
Number 9. The censors hated the violence. Not because it was graphic by modern standards, but because it was cold. The production code could handle shootouts, fistfights, dramatic standoffs. What it couldn't handle was execution. There's a scene where Nick Magellan kills a man in an apartment. No struggle, no music. Just a silenced gun, a body falling, and Nick walking out. The Motion Picture Association demanded it be reshot. Too clinical, they said. Too detached. It made murder look routine. Rouse argued that was the point. The mob didn't kill in dramatic showdowns. They killed efficiently, quietly, and moved on. The censors didn't care. They wanted hesitation, regret, something human. Rouse refused. He reshot the scene twice, each time making only minimal changes. On the third version, he added a brief pause, a single moment where Nick looks at the body before leaving. It was barely 2 seconds, but it was enough. The censors approved it, satisfied that some flicker of conscience had been shown. Rouse smiled and moved on, because he knew that pause wasn't conscience. It was a professional checking his work. The censors saw what they wanted to see, but the audience, they saw something else. They saw a man for whom murder was just another task, and that tiny moment of hesitation, it made him even colder. Number 10. The film almost didn't get released. After test screenings, Warner Brothers, who had initially passed on producing it, offered to buy the distribution rights, but they wanted changes. They wanted a happier ending, a redemption arc for Kathy, maybe a cop character who could provide moral clarity. Edward Small refused. He'd fought too hard to make the film uncompromising, and he wasn't about to soften it now. Warner Brothers walked away. Small scrambled to find independent distribution, eventually landing with a smaller company that would release it without interference. The result was a limited rollout, smaller theaters, minimal marketing. Critics didn't even see it until weeks after it opened, but word of mouth started building. Audiences who found it felt like they'd discovered something dangerous, something Hollywood wasn't supposed to show them. Box office numbers stayed modest, but the film developed a reputation. It wasn't a hit, it was something stranger. A cult film before that term really existed. Because New York Confidential didn't play by the rules, and in 1955, that was enough to make it unforgettable. Number 11. The jazz score wasn't composed for the film. It was recorded live during a single-night session at a club in Greenwich Village. Music director Joseph Mullendore wanted authenticity, the sound of smoke-filled rooms and desperate hours. So, he hired session musicians who actually played mob-connected nightclubs, guys who knew the scene because they lived in it. They set up in a basement club after hours, no audience, just instruments and shadows. Mullendore gave them minimal direction. "Play it cold," he said. "Play it like the city at 3 a.m. when everyone's gone home, except the people who can't." The musicians improvised for hours, trumpet lines that felt like sirens, bass notes that rumbled like subway trains, piano chords that hung in the air like unanswered questions. Mullendore recorded everything, then spliced the best takes into the film's backbone. What ended up on screen wasn't a traditional score, it was ambient dread, musical texture that felt less composed and more excavated from the city itself. Critics barely noticed it, which was exactly the point. The music didn't announce itself. It haunted the margins, crept into scenes without permission, and disappeared before you realized it was there. That's what made it perfect. Because in New York, Confidential, even the music understood that the most dangerous things never make noise until it's too late. Number 12. Broderick Crawford and Richard Conte despised each other. It started on day one and never improved. Crawford thought Conte was too method, too precious about his craft. Conte thought Crawford was a bully who used his Oscar as a weapon. Between takes, they didn't speak. During lunch, they sat on opposite sides of the lot. When scenes required them to interact, the air turned electric with genuine hostility. Director Russell Rouse noticed immediately, and instead of mediating, he weaponized it. He scheduled their scenes for late in the day when both actors were tired and irritable. He deliberately withheld script pages, so neither knew exactly what the other would do. He created an environment of distrust that bled directly into their performances, and it worked beautifully. On screen, Charlie Lupo and Nick Magellan circle each other like predators, each waiting for the other to show weakness. The tension isn't acted, it's real. You can feel Crawford's barely contained contempt. You can see Conte's cold calculation. Their scenes together crackle with danger because neither actor trusted the other not to upstage, undermine, or sabotage. Years later, Conte admitted he'd never worked with anyone he disliked more. Crawford never commented publicly, but crew members said he smiled when he heard Conte's quote. Sometimes the best performances come from the worst relationships.
Oh, we don't like it.
Number 13. There's a scene where Charlie Lupo executes a former associate who talked to the authorities. It's brief, brutal, and shockingly matter-of-fact. Crawford delivers the line, "You know what happens to rats," and pulls the trigger without hesitation. The scene was filmed in one take. No rehearsal, no blocking discussion, just cameras rolling, and Crawford doing what the script required. But what nobody knew was that Crawford had insisted on using a real gun loaded with blanks. The prop department argued against it. Too dangerous, too unpredictable. Crawford didn't care. He said he needed to feel the weight, the recoil, the reality of what his character was doing. Rouse approved it against every safety protocol. The actor playing the victim wasn't told until minutes before they filmed. When Crawford pointed that gun, the fear on the other actor's face wasn't performance. It was genuine terror. The take was perfect because nothing in it was fake. The gun was real. The fear was real. The violence, minus the actual bullet, was as real as cinema could make it. When the film was released, that scene became one of its most referenced moments. Not because of spectacle, but because of authenticity. You could feel the wrongness of it, the casual cruelty, the absolute absence of drama. Just business, just death, just another day in the life. Number 14. The ending was rewritten 3 times. In the original script, Charlie Lupo escaped. He disappeared into the machine he helped build, unpunished, still operating. Test audiences hated it. They wanted justice, consequences, closure. The studio demanded a new ending where Lupo died in a shootout with police. Rouse filmed it, then shelved it. Too conventional, he said. Too Hollywood. The third version was a compromise. Lupo doesn't escape, but he doesn't die in a blaze of glory either. He's arrested quietly, efficiently, the same way he ran his operation. No dramatic speeches, no final stand, just handcuffs and a car door closing. It wasn't satisfying in a traditional sense, but it was honest. Because in reality, mob bosses rarely went out in gunfights. They went to trial, they negotiated sentences, they traded information. So the system processed them like it processed everything else. Reyes fought for that ending because it reflected the film's entire philosophy. The syndicate wasn't dramatic, it was bureaucratic. And its end, when it came, would be just as cold and procedural as everything else it touched. The studio approved it reluctantly. Audiences left theaters unsettled, which was exactly the point. New York Confidential wasn't meant to comfort, it was meant to document. Number 15. Anne Bancroft's final scene, where Kathy confronts her father about his crimes, was filmed at sunrise. Rouse scheduled it deliberately, knowing both actors would be exhausted. They had been shooting night scenes for 2 weeks, and sleep deprivation had left everyone raw. Bancroft arrived on set with her lines memorized, but her emotions barely contained. Crawford showed up, silent, distant, already in character. Rouse told them to play at once. No stops, no interruptions. The cameras rolled. Bancroft unleashed everything she'd been holding back. Weeks of intimidation, frustration, fear, all channeled into Kathy's desperate plea for her father to stop. Crawford responded with cold dismissal, not because the script required it, but because that's who he was in that moment. The scene ran 8 minutes uninterrupted. By the end, Bancroft was crying real tears. Crawford never broke character, never softened. When Rouse called cut, nobody moved. The crew stood frozen, unsure if they'd just witnessed acting or something more painful. Bancroft walked off set without speaking to anyone. Crawford lit a cigarette and went to his trailer. The scene made the final cut with almost no edits. It remains the emotional center of the film. A daughter watching her father choose power over family, and knowing there's nothing she can do to save him.
Hello, Catherine.
How bad is it, Doctor?
Now, there's nothing to worry about.
Number 16. The film's poster was banned in 3 cities. Not for violence or sexuality, but for its tagline, "The syndicate runs the city." Who runs the syndicate? Local politicians saw it as an accusation. In Chicago, the mayor personally called for the poster to be removed from theater lobbies. In Newark, theater owners received visits from unnamed individuals suggesting alternative marketing materials. In New Orleans, the film played under a different title entirely, The Mob Strikes Back, with artwork that completely obscured the original intent. Edward Small didn't fight it. He couldn't afford to. The film was already struggling for distribution, and picking fights with city governments would only make it harder to screen. But the controversy helped in unexpected ways. Every banned poster, every city that tried to suppress it, became free publicity. Audiences started seeking it out specifically because someone didn't want them to see it. The film became a litmus test for how close to the truth you could get before power pushed back. And for a movie about organized crime's grip on American cities, having politicians try to suppress it was the most authentic marketing possible. Because New York Confidential's real subject wasn't just the mob. It was the system that allowed it to flourish. And that system didn't like being examined. Number 17. Richard Conte kept the suit he wore in the film. It was a simple gray suit, well-tailored but unremarkable. Exactly what a professional killer would wear to blend in. After production wrapped, wardrobe asked for it back. Conte refused. He told them he'd pay for it. They said it wasn't about money, it was studio property. Conte didn't care. He kept it anyway. Years later, in interviews, he'd mentioned that suit unprompted. He said wearing it changed how he moved, how he held himself. The weight of the fabric, the cut of the shoulders, it made him feel like a different person. Someone capable of terrible things without hesitation. He wore it to dinner parties sometimes, just to see how people responded. They treated him differently, he said, more carefully, like they sensed something dangerous underneath the ordinary exterior. That's what the suit represented, the camouflage of evil, the way violence hides in plain sight, dressed like everyone else, waiting for the moment to reveal itself. Conte eventually donated it to a film museum, but he admitted he missed it. Not because it was expensive or well-made, but because it reminded him of the darkest performance he ever gave, the one where he played a man with no soul and discovered how easy it was. Number 18. The film flopped commercially, but found a second life in France. French critics, particularly those writing for Cahiers du Cinéma, championed it as a masterpiece of American noir. They appreciated its cold efficiency, its refusal to moralize, its documentary approach to organized crime. Directors like Jean-Pierre Melville cited it as an influence on their own crime films. The French title, New York Confidential, became synonymous with a certain kind of uncompromising realism. What American audiences dismissed as too cold, too distant, too detached, French cinephiles celebrated as revolutionary. They understood that Rouse wasn't making a traditional gangster picture. He was creating a procedural about institutional corruption. By the 1960s, the film had developed a cult following in European art houses, screening alongside works by Dassin and Huston. American critics eventually caught up, but it took years. The film that couldn't find an audience in 1955 became a touchstone for a new generation of filmmakers who wanted to show crime without glamour, violence without catharsis, evil without explanation. It proved that sometimes the coldest films burn the longest. Because New York Confidential didn't try to entertain, it tried to expose, and that made it timeless. Number 19. Broderick Crawford never watched the finished film. After his final scene wrapped, he told Rouse he was done, not just with the movie, but with the experience. He'd given everything to Charlie Lupo, and he didn't want to see it reflected back. When the premiere came, Crawford sent his agent with apologies. When critics praised his performance, he thanked them without elaborating. When friends asked if he'd seen it, he changed the subject. Decades later, in one of his final interviews, someone asked why. Crawford said, playing Charlie Lupo had shown him something about himself he didn't like. The ease with which he accessed that coldness, that capacity for cruelty. It came from somewhere real, and once he'd found it, he couldn't unfind it. Watching the film would mean confronting that darkness, seeing it preserved forever on screen. He preferred to let it go, to walk away and never look back. It was the only role he refused to revisit, the only performance he wouldn't discuss in detail. And maybe that's the ultimate testament to how deeply he inhabited Charlie Lupo. Because the best villains aren't the ones actors enjoy playing. They're the ones that leave scars. Number 20. New York Confidential was Richard Conte's favorite performance, but his most painful memory. In interviews late in his career, he'd talk about the film with a mixture of pride and regret. Pride because he knew he'd created something genuinely unsettling. Regret because playing Nick Magellan required him to shut down every human impulse, every emotional response. For weeks during filming, he trained himself not to react, not to feel, to become a void. And it worked. But it didn't stop when filming wrapped. Conte said it took months to find his way back to normal emotional responses. His wife noticed it first, the distance, the blankness. Friends commented that he seemed different, harder. Conte realized he'd method acted himself into a kind of temporary sociopathy, and climbing out was harder than falling in. He eventually recovered, but the experience changed how he approached acting. He never went that deep into darkness again. Never allowed a character to consume him so completely. New York. Confidential remained his benchmark for commitment and his warning about the cost. Because some roles don't just challenge you, they change you. And Nick Magellan, the emotionless killer who saw people as targets, almost made Richard Conte forget how to see them as human. Bonus fact. After the film wrapped, the props department inventoried everything. Guns, furniture, costumes, set dressing. But one item never made it back. A leather-bound ledger used in Charlie Lupo's office scenes. It was filled with fake entries, names, numbers, locations, all created to look like actual syndicate records. The prop master filed a report. The studio insurance investigated. Nothing. The ledger had vanished. Months later, rumors started circulating. Someone claimed they'd seen it in an actual mob-connected social club in Brooklyn, sitting on a shelf like it belonged there. Another crew member swore they spotted it in a photograph from a police raid, seized as evidence in an unrelated case. Whether either story was true, nobody could confirm, but the legend persisted that somewhere between the set and the prop warehouse, New York Confidential's fake mob ledger slipped into the real world and became part of the thing it was pretending to document. It's probably nothing, probably just lost, destroyed, forgotten. But in a film where the line between fiction and reality blurred from the first frame, Maybe it's fitting that one piece of the movie escaped entirely, because New York Confidential was never really about pretending. It was about revealing, and sometimes the props knew that better than anyone.